Hello, you're watching Dukascopy TV. I'm Ben Jones. Japan has seen an increase in its exports in the most recent trade balance data released. And in their meeting today, the Bank of Japan have outlined that quantitative easing is continuing to help their economy grow. Joining me on the line to discuss these topics is Adam Slater from Oxford Economics. So on Wednesday, Adam, we had trade balance data released and there was a lot of growth, especially regarding exports. They've risen 4.4% from a year earlier. How significant is this, and how do you see it affecting the country's economy?
The trade data for Japan over recent months has been, in some respects, disappointing because volumes of exports have not been growing that fast, and that is to do to a substantial extent with weak demand regionally. But the October data was a little bit more upbeat in that regard. We did see a decent increase in export volumes in October, and they were up 5.3% on a year ago. So I think this is good news. I think it shows that the yen devaluation is now starting to come through on the volume side as well as just increasing the profit margins of exporters. In terms of how it affects the economy, it's an important positive for the economy if it's sustained. We obviously know that Japan is not a country where domestic demand growth has been very robust in recent years, so exports have got a big job to do in driving the kind of cyclical recovery that's being aimed at by the authorities over the next year or two. And so there will be some encouragement, I think, in that regard from this data.
Now, moving on to today's Bank of Japan meeting, Governor Haruhiko Kuroda has been very positive about Japan's recovery and the overall global outlook in the US and the Eurozone. Why do you think this is?
Well, I mean, I think the Bank of Japan will be broadly happy with the way things have gone domestically over the last few quarters since they introduced, as we know, some very radical policy changes at the start of this year. We've had 3 quarters of pretty strong economic growth, even if Q3 was a little softer than the previous 2. We've got, I think, unexpectedly strong consumer spending in Japan this year. We've had some signs of an improvement in investment intentions. Business confidence surveys have been pretty strong recently. And as I mentioned earlier, we've also got now, with perhaps some delay, a pickup in export volume. So most of the domestic drivers for Japan are developing along the lines that you would have hoped. In addition to which, of course, there's also been a pickup in inflation, which is, again, more or less what has been targeted by the Bank of Japan, and even the core measures of inflation more or less stable in the latest readings, which is a positive sign. In terms of the international economy, I think if there's going to be an export-led recovery which will sustain for any length of time in Japan, then it is really rather important that the international economy recovers too. And there I think the evidence is more mixed. The detailed Japanese trade data will show you that exports to the United States have been picking up quite strongly, and actually very recently also there's been an interesting pickup in exports to the Eurozone despite relatively weak growth in the Eurozone. So I think there are some reasons for Mr. Kuroda's remarks that you can see in the very latest data.
And finally, what else do you think is really significant about the meeting today, and how do you see it affecting Japan in the future?
Well, there were no major policy changes announced at today's meeting, so in that respect, it isn't vastly important. I think the critical question with regard to what's going to happen next year is whether or not there's going to be a further extension of the monetary policies that were put in train at the start of this year and towards the end of last year. And there we did get a hint from Mr. Kuroda that we might get something probably at the start of next year, in the first quarter, second quarter of next year, dependent on what happens with the consumption tax increase. There was a suggestion that there might be an extension of the current loose monetary policy beyond the current planned period, and possibly an increase in its size as well. Now, from our perspective, that makes a lot of sense, although the monetary policy that's been put in place this year has shown some positive results in terms of economic growth, in terms of the yen depreciation, in terms of the pickup in inflation. If the Bank of Japan is serious about getting to 2% inflation over the medium term, our view is that the monetary effort that will be required to do that almost certainly does go beyond what is currently projected in the Bank of Japan's plans. So in that sense, we're slightly recovered. We're slightly relieved, I suppose, that the Bank of Japan has announced this today.
Adam, thank you very much for joining me today. That is all from me, but make sure you tune in tomorrow as I'll be bringing you the weekly wrap-up. But for now, goodbye.